It is with a deep sense of honor that I welcome Honorable Union Finance Minister Shri Arun Jaitley ji for our in-conversation today. It is indeed a great delight to have you, sir, amidst us, and we are grateful for the time you have given us in spite of your very excruciating schedule. I welcome Shri Ashok Malik and Shri Shakti Sinha on his own turf, both the principal driving forces behind the in-conversation initiative. Between you, Union Finance Minister and Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi, you have originated and reignited a fundamental national debate on election and political funding, the like of which was last seen taking place amongst stalwarts such as Rajaji, Lohiya, Deen Dayal Upadhyay, and a few others in the early 60s. In fact, taking up issues that were long marginalized because it suited some entrenched sections, generating a wide debate and initiating dynamic action on them has become, to borrow your own inimitable expression, the new normal for this dispensation. That which others would avoid, that which others would prefer to silence or to overlook, you and Prime Minister Modi have taken head on. The union budget presented by you this year reflected that determination of yours and has set the agenda to transform, energize, and clean India, TEC, in your own words. Transform, energize, and clean India. TEC India is the objective to clean the country of the evils of corruption, black money, and non-transparent political funding. It is indeed a great opportunity for us today to have you with us and to absorb the vision and to reinitiate a national debate on campaign funding reform, which will eventually lead us towards a new polity. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Anirban. Let me once again welcome, Anirban's already done so, all of you to this in-conversation. It's so good to see an enlightened audience like you. This morning's papers reported a news item from Transparency International saying that 71% of Indians who use government service in the last 1 year say they have paid a bribe, which is the highest in Asia Pacific. And yet the respondents have also said they appreciate the efforts the government is making towards reducing corruption. So that's a hopeful sign. A lot of people trace corruption in India to elections, the need for funding for political parties. And they say, if only you could sort it out, things would become so much better. And therefore, Minister, my first question to you is, how serious is the connection between the electoral funding and campaign finance and black money? And in comparison to, say, the role of real estate, tax avoidance, bribery for government services, how important would be this?
You see, rather than immediately respond between these sectors as to how they end up funding campaigns of political parties, let me give you my own understanding of how campaign funding over the years has really evolved. When we started the electoral system in independent India, there was actually no application of mine on how political funding is to be supported. Multi-party democracy is our system. You will have political parties in a multi-party democracy. You will have a cost of running those parties. You will have a cost of those parties contesting elections. And obviously parties don't do any business, they don't generate income themselves. And as world over, from your supporting segment, you raise donations. Conventionally, through the 50s and 60s in India, elections were not a very costly exercise. I remember even in the decade of the 90s, there were constituencies in Bihar, Orissa, West Bengal, more towards the eastern part of India, which could be contested with modest expenditure. Now, parties needed two kinds of expenditure. One is the cost of running the party yourself. You have offices, you have staff, you have offices all over the country. You have travel expenses, you have publicity expenses. And as the nature of campaigns increased, a very large amount of this campaign money had to be spent as accounted money. Today, major political parties, for the cost of travel, the cost of hiring helicopters, aircrafts, inserting advertisements in social media, electronic media, newspapers, all this is accounted money. Now the question was, how do the political parties generate this? Now we had made no provision within our constitutional system. There was only some reference which came in the Companies Act at some stage. And I remember we made a major effort where both the national parties, somewhere in 2001 or 2, the Congress party, then in opposition, appointed a committee headed by Dr. Manmohan Singh as to how political parties must be funded. And in the Government of India, we had the Law Ministry, which I was looking after, which started working on this. And there was a large convergence of opinion between the two national parties. And the entire issue also went up, I think, before the standing committee, which was headed then by the present president. And the following formulation appeared: that let people contribute money by check. This can be contributed by an individual, by a sole proprietorship firm, by a partnership or a Hindu undivided family or a company. Now, as far as individuals and partnership firms were concerned, this is your own wealth. As far as a company was concerned, it is also shareholders' wealth. So on all these other entities, there was no cap. But in companies, a cap was provided in law. And a procedure was laid down that they should make donations to political parties by check. And if they made it within this procedure by check, they will be required to file their returns before the income tax and also before the election commission. And a list of everyone. Initially, this figure was 10,000 rupees. It was later increased to 20,000. Whoever makes a donation beyond this mentioned amount, a list of these donors will be given to the election commission and also to the income tax authorities. And each entity, when it makes a donation by check, in order to incentivize people from moving towards check, rather than siphoning money or generating cash, will get a deduction of an equal amount as though it was his own expenditure. So it will be deducted as his expenditure. So if somebody made a 10 lakh or a 50 lakh donation, he'll get a deduction of 10 lakhs or 50 lakhs as expenditure. And this system, since the earlier part of the last decade, has functioned. Now we've seen the functioning of this system, and I've been personally very closely monitoring it. I must say that political parties during this period started requesting donors, please use this provision. You don't have to generate cash. You give it by check. A very large part of our expenditure is also has to go through the banking system. The donors expressed reluctance on two counts. Some did shift to check. Others expressed reluctance on two counts. One is that it becomes transparent because it's mentioned in our books of accounts and our balance sheets. And anybody can go to the ROC, check my accounts. And there will be some kind of a political vendetta by rivals that why did you fund my rival? Secondly, over the years, the kind of suspicious system that we have developed, that if somebody honestly gave money, let us say, to one party or more than one party, and his balance sheet so reflects, in the course of the next 5 years, he legitimately got a contract somewhere in that state, ruled by that party. Somebody will file a PIL and say, oh, there's a quid pro quo. And they were actually of people who had honestly donated by check, and then subsequently, normal course of their business activity, succeeded in getting contracts, then face this allegation. And media could highlight them. So the fear of these two consequences created a situation where there was a reluctance. I remember when Mr. Pranab Mookerjee was the finance minister in the UPA government, as a leader of opposition, I wrote to him, telling that there was a difficulty, and therefore I suggested a change to him in a letter I had written. And he accepted that. In the budget he announced that change. And the change was that just as a party, a donor gets a tax deduction, if instead of directly donating to a party, if there is a pass-through electoral trust created, so the Income Tax Act was amended to provide for electoral trusts. So somebody could donate to that trust, the balance sheet would only disclose the name of the trust, and the trust could donate the money further. So the money would be clean. Many people have used these electoral trusts. And I must say that several donors, either directly themselves through their companies or to the trust, started donating. But what started coming by check was only a part of what was required for political funding. This was one change. The second change which I have noticed all these years is that in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, I used to see grassroots political workers with receipt books going from home to home, shop to shop, collecting small donations. And those donations would be used to support the party campaigns in those areas. That system gradually came to an end. And grassroots collections slowed down or just faded away, and therefore you had to go in for bigger amounts. That's a disturbing change which took place. Also, the practice which Election Commission commented on was that if you, in addition to these check donations, if you got a large cash donation, the Election Commission felt that this 20,000 was too large a figure, so people would split it up into donors of 18,000 and 15,000, so less than 20,000. And just at the end of the year, say 1 million people donated less than 20,000 to me, or approximate slightly less than 20,000 to me, and cut out coupons or receipts accordingly. So the Election Commission said, reduce this to 2,000. So no more party can receive a donation more than 2,000 rupees by cash from anybody. Now, several attempts have been made to develop a larger consensus on this issue. When in 2002 we'd amended the law, the Congress, the BJP and other political parties came together and supported this amendment. Let there be check donations and let there be a tax deduction to incentivize people. The left had an ideological problem. And the ideological problem was, how can we in principle accept that businesses give money to political parties? So they dissented. Now this debate continued. So we now considered this entire issue in the context of the demonetization debate. That you make generation of cash difficult, you make expenditure in cash difficult. The GST once implemented will make for businesses extremely difficult to generate cash. And therefore, in this situation, when you are preaching to the rest of the world, what happens to your own funding? Can it remain partly by check, partly cash camouflaged as smaller donations? And should this not come to an end? So I have now suggested in the budget four proposals really. And there are four methods we have suggested by which political parties can collect funds. First of all, my own preference, and I have suggested to my party, which has accepted this suggestion, and I'm sure they will launch the first campaign of this kind. Today, you don't have to go with receipt books from shop to shop. The world has changed. I think the most preferred option will be political parties launching amongst their own support base a digital campaign for raising donations. So you'll have large political parties where lakhs of supporters can actually donate modest amounts. The Obama campaign in the US, the first election, was entirely funded that way. There is no quid pro quo, there is no obligation incurred, there are no large amounts, and your own support base in lakhs and lakhs can actually contribute. I think my party at least has the capacity to launch such a campaign. And if we did it, I'm sure some other parties will also start following this. This is the easiest way, and you can collect a reasonable corpus. In villages, towns, etc., in small areas, if there is a political function or a rally to be organized in an election, there still will be people who will go to the more affluent people in that area. So the Election Commission suggestion that the maximum cash donation can be 2,000 rupees. Some people say abolish this. Some people say keeping the reality of rural India in mind. How is the campaign, let's say in a village, if a candidate is to visit and the village is to organize a function, how will they fund it? So keep this little window open. There can be two views on this. The third, you continue the existing system where any donor who has no problem in disclosing his identity pays directly by check. And the fourth system is this whole idea of electoral bonds. Now, this idea, I must say, has been closely debated within the government in a small group. Now, how do these bonds function? These bonds have to be authorized under a particular scheme, under the Income Tax Act. That scheme will be announced once the finance bill is approved. That scheme will have the following features. It will open only for a limited period of time during elections, or maybe a little before the elections. The life of a bond will be very short. It will be few days. Why do we take these two precautions? Because knowing the manner in which people have laundered money, a bond should not become a parallel currency. That people start transacting in bonds. So it's only available for a few days. A bond can be purchased by any donor only by check payment from the authorized bank. Let's say State Bank is the authorized bank for a bond. You go to a bond and buy your bonds. You can donate these bonds only to a political party. And these are redeemable, let us say within a period of 4 weeks, if such a time is fixed, or 3 weeks, whatever is the time the scheme will fix, of the purchase of the bond, in only one account of that political party, which has to be pre-declared to the Election Commission. So every recognized political party will have one account, it will declare to the Election Commission. So at the end of the election, I can say, well, I got bonds of such and such amount. Now, this system will ensure that it's clean money in the hands of the donor. It's clean money in the hands of a political party. It is partly transparent because the donor's balance sheet will declare how much he has given. To which political party he has given how much is a fact known to him. And the laws will be changed accordingly. I'm quite willing to consider even a better system because if somebody has a suggestion, but people are yet to make a suggestion to me. Now, if you say that let the donor declare as to how much he gave to which party, then the donor comes back to the 2002 position, which really hasn't worked. So this is totally clean, partly transparent or substantially transparent. And political parties will start, and this will help the donors because a lot of donors are saying that as more and more businesses get structured, corporatized, and regularized, it's extremely difficult for them to generate cash. And therefore, dealing in cash today, as recent months have shown, is a huge risk. It's a risk in the hands of a donor, it's a risk in the hands of the political party itself. And therefore, with a combination of these four, if you are to ask me, my preferred option is the first one. Because going shop to shop required a lot of physical labor. Now that India is getting connected digitally, I don't think it requires that kind of a physical labor also. And therefore, it's only a question of taking an initiative, an online campaign that please donate to my party, and your support base will always donate to you a moderate amount. So that being a preferred option, I think this is the complete package for cleaning money. Now, you asked, so I'll just respond to your question. When you asked me as to how do you see the connection, there are some businesses which used to conventionally generate more cash. And there are some businesses, the IT industry, the manufacturing industry, where it is extremely difficult. And if you generate cash, your balance sheets will get completely skewed up and your liabilities are going to go up. It's extremely difficult. And therefore, we have to understand that the constituency of donors will also find it extremely difficult to generate cash in those industries. And even areas like real estate, which is always in these cases the favorite whipping boy, today they are in a stress themselves. And therefore, to expect them not being able to sell their real estate on one hand and to generate unlawful cash on the other hand, it's a double whammy for them.
Minister, my question relates to, you said your preferred option was the first one, where millions or hundreds of millions of citizens and ordinary supporters donate fairly modest sums of money. Now, you have managed elections for the BJP earlier. How was the experience in the old days under the with the Jansangh, of collecting money from hundreds of millions of small ordinary supporters? Was it feasible? Is it feasible? I know it's done in America, but that's a different society.
I think those days it was feasible. Even political workers could take out a lot more time than they can today. It required a lot of physical labor. You had people doing it. In the villages, it still takes place. Or in the smaller towns, it still takes place. But it's a practice which is dying out. And therefore, I think today, in a changed format, India has to realize that this practice has to be revived online. And I think once it's revived online, the amount of physical effort which will go into it will be much less. And I'm quite sure political parties, some have already started it. And as I said, some are on the verge of starting it. I think every political party should give it a big try. Today, it can succeed, but substantially online.
My next question is, you must have studied campaign finance models in other countries and other systems. What, in your view, apart from the reforms you've suggested in the budget this year, is an ideal and yet feasible method of campaign finance? What
See,
more
I'll
would
tell
you
you,
suggest?
there is an argument which many have given, which was a part of the old Indrajit Gupta committee report, and many in the past, including in my own parties, had supported it, saying let there be state funding. It's a possible suggestion. It's a possible suggestion. But I will add only two caveats. It should not be understood that I am critical of it. Many are going to question in the long run, in India, given the level of cynicism in public opinion, as to why people should be taxed extra in order to fund politics and politicians. It's a slogan, but I am not so sure if it's going to be a very popular one once implemented. Second, this model has no guarantee that what you will get from the state is the only money that you will spend. And the argument will be that you can't spend within that limit, and obviously you take some from the state and then you go hunting elsewhere. So this model, nobody seriously discussed these two caveats that I am putting on this model. Let this be discussed, because after all, even the present model is an experimental model that I have suggested. Because if it's taken us 70 years not to reach a solution, you have to discuss all the models.
After the, as finance minister, you no doubt meet industry and big businesses, and they have, as in the past, expressed their concerns about the so-called vendetta fear and all that. After the reforms that were announced, the measures that were announced in the budget, what has their response been? Privately, what have they said?
I do feel there'll be three. There are reactions which are visible. There is a reaction from the body of donors, not a structured body, but individual. I think they are relieved, and relieved because there are many Indian businesses, small and big, who run professional businesses. Most important sectors have FDI participation. They have independent directors. They have very strong audits. And they have to follow the best accounting norms. And therefore, the huge risk involved in all this, if you were not to donate by check, is something that they can't afford indefinitely. And in terms of corporate governance, it will be a highly improper model if we allowed that to continue. That some people giving by check, some giving through the trust model, and some just inflating expenditure and generating cash and giving it to you. It's not an acceptable model. It can't continue indefinitely. You can't say we are the fastest growing economy, we aspire to be a developed economy now, and yet this is the model the world's largest democracy has. I think therefore there is a huge amount of relief as far as the donors are concerned, that a clean system where I don't have to steal money from my own company for somebody else. I think they are relieved. I think a lot of sensible political parties eventually will realize that this is the correct way. The left will have an ideological problem with this. Columnists and NGOs conventionally have a problem with every solution. So they will continue to comment.
But can I just step in on this, going back to state funding a little bit, in the sense that, yes, parties would require money more than what the state could obviously provide them, obviously. But to that extent that the state provides them money, would reduce the pressure on them to go running around, in that sense, industrialist, and then thereby make at least businesses more cleaner by itself. So to that extent, there is an argument.
I don't think, I think this model is dependent on a question as to whether candidates are spending within the norm which is prescribed, there is an uneasy feeling that that's not true. Secondly, a political party's expenditure, as I explained to you, a party may have offices to spend, it may have staff salaries, it will hire vehicles, it will buy petrol, it will buy air tickets, it will hire planes, it will hire helicopters, it will put advertisement space in newspapers and television. A party's expenditure would be hugely outside the scope of what the government would fund. Surely you don't expect a government to start funding parties hiring aircrafts and helicopters. And I'm sure if my understanding of India's public opinion is what it is, there'll be a hue and cry if you had that model. And therefore, we've been just mentioning this as an attractive model. I think the state can fund what a candidate has to officially spend. To beyond that, and there is a huge world of expenditure outside that also.
While deciding...
I don't think the Indrajit Gupta committee envisaged the system becoming so costly.
While doing the calculations before demonetization, you must have done an assessment of the areas where the undeclared cash economy or the black money economy is the largest. Real estate, of course, being one, as Shakti suggested. There are 2 or 3 such buckets. Campaign finance is one such bucket. How big is it? Are there any estimates, or would that be an unfair question?
You see, compared to the entire size of the economy, it is not very large. Compared to the entire size of the cash economy, there are no estimates. But I think it's exaggerated and overstated. And then also remember, in an election, a central party will collect, a state party will collect, a district will collect, a candidate will collect. So there are collections which take place in every party at different levels. Of some areas your supporters will spend. And therefore, I don't think to have a clear estimate of this is really possible.
My final question is, you said that the sensible and the 2 national parties will broadly come around to this view. Has there been any pushback from in the political class?
You see, conventionally on this issue, the stand of the Congress and the BJP was not very different. But now these days you have a different Congress, so I don't know how they will react.
But how would the regional parties be, to add on to Ashok's? How has there been this thing on campaign finance? Because they have been a little critical of moves towards greater use of checks and...
I think, you see, by and large, any party in opposition, should welcome it. For the reason that if money was to be only given by check, it would conventionally lean in favor of the ruling party, either in the center or the state. So the ruling party requires a big heart to say, do it by a model in which I won't know how you are funding my opponents. So to create a model, and I think once a model like this takes off, after all, the body of donors is the same whether at the center or the state. So it could be different in some states because, don't forget, both land and liquor, that's potable liquor, are state subjects in India.
That says it all.
I think we should now...
Open up for questions.
Sadanand, I can see your hands up. I'll come to that.
Thank you, Minister, for your comments. I have a question about a hypothetical situation. Let's say you're a state government which has been funded by a liquor baron, and the implicit quid pro quo there is that in return for that funding, that liquor baron will get a license. Now we have this new system that you've put in place. Now the liquor baron funds the party as before, but now he does it through these bonds. How then has your new system broken the nexus or helped clean the system?
Well, first of all, uh, let us be clear that when the difference will be, A, you are using official money, you are using tax-paid money. And therefore, in tax-paid money, the disciplining that a company has to do, let's assume that these are companies, its board resolution and so on. And to mention, supposing a liquor baron in a state who's functioning only within a state suddenly came up and said, I bought both ones 1,000 crores. At least this fact itself is going to be too scary. And therefore, today's possibility, he can do such an amount and get away with it. In the alternative system, it's extremely difficult for him because the quantums will be known. And secondly, since the nature of money is also a costlier money, it's money on which tax has already been paid. So any company is not going to push itself into losses in order to pay. So cleaner money is going to be spent more discreetly.
Honorable Minister, thank you so much for your comments. I want to ask you a question which is just an offshoot of the debate that we're discussing, with respect to having the elections, that is the central elections and the elections that you have in the state at the same times. And it's a debate which was flagged by the Prime Minister. So what are your perspectives on if we have such a scenario, whether that will reduce or increase the amount of funding that political parties have per se in an election?
It will, hugely reduce the quantum of expenditure. It will reduce the quantum of expenditure because if Lok Sabha and State Assembly elections are held together, the campaigns will be common. And in a common campaign, I think the money spent will be much less. It won't be duplicated. I think secondly, besides money, it will also improve the quality of governance. Why I say that? That if you have divided elections, these days, India has 2 sets of elections every year. So you have some state assembly elections in the beginning of the year, now you will have the next round of elections towards the later part of the year. And therefore, the energy of governments, both at the center and the state, of political parties or parliament, the issues which come up for debate, not only are the energies diverted, not only the code of conduct comes into operation and governance comes to a standstill during those periods, but also the quality of debate gets more election-centric rather than governance-centric. So these days, out of a 5-year term, any government would be spending a very large percentage of its energies, time, resource, and the public space really in the electoral debate. Now, so the impact is not only on cost, the impact is also on governance. And that's why the Prime Minister has been repeatedly saying, let us try and have this amendment. Of course, it will require a change in the Constitution, and for which it requires a larger consensus.
In fact, just to add to that, being in the government in the past as a civil servant, well before the code of conduct, literally 3 months before, staff are actually taken out for election work. And if you actually add the cost of elections, all the salaries, the lost opportunity cost, etc., much greater amount is spent on actually conducting elections than it shows up on the paper. The gentleman at the back, the young man at the back, yeah, there.
जनाब जेटली साहब, मेरा सवाल ये है कि दुनिया में कोई भी मुल्क ऐसा नहीं है जहाँ पे दौलत का बंटवारा सही हो पाया है. हमारा इसमें हिंदुस्तान में भी इस दौलत का बंटवारा सही नहीं हो पाया अब तक. तो कैसे दौलत का बंटवारा सही हो हिंदुस्तान में, कब तक ये मुमकिन है कि आम जनता के बीच में?
हम तो निर्वाचन की फंडिंग की बात करते हैं.
फंडिंग की बात
की
जेटली साहब से मुलाकात असल कम होती, इसलिए मैं सोचा कि
अच्छा वहाँ नौकरी कर्ज ही नहीं दे रहे उसी मुलाकात के बाद।
देखिए सही है आपने कहा कि दौलत का बंटवारा हो, इसमें केवल मैं दो चीज कहूंगा कि दौलत जनरेट भी हो, अधिक दौलत पैदा हो और उसका बंटवारा हो तो बेहतर है। ये जो 1971 वाला मॉडल था ना कि प्रोडक्टिविटी बढ़ाओ नहीं और केवल उसको रीडिस्ट्रीब्यूट कर दो, वो देश के हित में नहीं है। और दूसरा, मैं मानता हूं कि डीमोनेटाइजेशन का गरीब आदमी ने इसलिए समर्थन भी किया कि टैक्स इवेजन गरीब के खिलाफ और दौलत के इस बंटवारे के खिलाफ जाता है। जो आदमी टैक्स इवेड करता है, देयर इज एन अनजस्ट एनरिचमेंट इन हिज फेवर, एंड दिस रिसोर्स शुड हैव कम टू द स्टेट एंड बी यूज्ड फॉर द अदर्स. That's inherently what tax evasion does. It creates an unjust enrichment in favor of the tax evader as against the poor people on whom that resource would have been spent.
One question to you and then here.
Yeah, Arunji, we have already CSR funding, corporate social responsibility, CSR. So can that fund can be used for election funding?
नहीं,
And we can have simultaneous election, it will save a lot of.
देखिए साइमल्टेनियस इलेक्शन तो डिफरेंट है, सीएसआर का उद्देश्य वो नहीं है। सीएसआर का उद्देश्य ये है कि हर कंपनी अपने प्रॉफिट में से 2% निकालकर किसी न किसी सामाजिक कार्य में लाए। वो सामाजिक कार्य शिक्षा का हो सकता है, वो क्रीड़ा का हो सकता है, वो कोई भी हो सकता है, बट दिस कांट बी यूज्ड फॉर पॉलिटिकल फंडिंग. Then again it will become a tax on the people so that politicians can fly all over the country in planes and helicopters and do their campaign. And let me tell you, if you got the government resource into this kind of a campaign, some parties these days excessively advertising on television, on government resources. There's a resentment against using public money for excessive expenditure. चुनाव में तो एक्सेसिव एक्सपेंडिचर होता है विज्ञापनों पे, तो लोग कहेंगे मेरा पैसा इसमें जा रहा है, आप गरीबी में लगाते हैं इसको.
Thank you very much for your really candid set of reflections. One of the challenges that you mentioned about the Obama election itself was that even after the cleaning up of the system of access to that money, it still ended up a lot of money coming into the electoral process, and that we have seen in successive elections in the United States. So if we in India were to look at a reform, shouldn't we be leapfrogging the idea of campaign finance and somehow combine as an aspect of state funding, which US is even now discussing because their debates on campaign finance has been going for the last 30, 40 years. So in some ways, combination of state funding and a systematic effort to reduce the cost of elections too.
All this is possible. So I am not saying that I would rule out the state funding idea completely. Because, as I said, for 70 years we haven't found an answer. We found slogans. And we found faults with every suggestion which was made. And therefore, let's keep that idea of state funding on the table. Let's have it flagged for discussion for a reform. But this time we decided that instead of just saying that we don't take a decision for want of consensus, let's have a decision, and within the facilities or the authority available to a government, some solution is possible, we'll move forward on it.
International Women's Day, this lady, first time a lady ने हाथ उठाया है, so even though she's asked after others, but.
Hi. My question is, what's your view upon RTI for political parties?
You see, RTI for political parties, in which areas? If it is political funding, if it's funding and accounts, political parties, RTI is already applicable, not on the party. We file our return with the Election Commission, and the Election Commission in the RTI releases our accounts to whoever it wants. So the RTI doesn't lie against the party, it lies against the Election Commission. Kindly give me the copy of the accounts of the Congress party or the BJP or the Samajwadi party. You can even today take it from the election. You can't get it from the income tax authorities because there's a provision in the Income Tax Act, it can't be made public. But you can get it from the Election Commission, and they are being made. Now, political parties are putting all their resolutions and decisions already on the net. Electoral strategies, no. The Congress party, how did you choose your candidates? The Congress party should tell us 2 months in advance as to whether it's aligning with the Samajwadi party or not. Obviously, it's not possible. And therefore, if you want to have a repetitive RTI, that instead of our going to the Election Commission, we must come to your office, you can have a formal amendment. I have no problem with that. But that's already indirectly available, that part.
We're running out of time, I think. We'll have one or two more. This young man has been putting his hand up for a very long time. Ye jo khade jo. Ye jo khade.
Good evening, sir. My question is, how can we minimize the expense of elections? As far as, we see that these days there is not a level playing field. I saw a report where Iram Sharmila, the Iron Lady of Manipur, she has not been able to fight an election just because she has a lack of funds. Also, these days, politicians are enabled to express what, they want to express, and they are taking help of poll managers. So, what do you think, how can we minimize this election campaign?
You see, first of all, I think there is an evolution in the election process which is going on. In the style of campaigning, electronic media and now social media have also become important. And these are very cost effective. Except in some cases where they may be paid news. These you get almost for free. And I think more and more campaigning shifting on this is one important idea. I think the poll managers concept is something new. And I hope you get the not subtle but clear message behind what I am saying. If a party, because of its own evolution structure, fails to create a natural leadership which will lead and manage campaigns, it will have to outsource that function. Otherwise, for any self-respecting leader who spent 3 or 4 decades in public life, to be told that now you have to go and report to a hired manager because he has more brains than us, we didn't create enough. I think it's an idea which many in the political parties will find absolutely repulsive.
Thank you, Minister, for your comments. Sir, I wanted to get your opinion upon the elections that are a little less in the public scrutiny, and that is the elections to the upper house in the parliament and to the legislative council elections. So in that we have seen in the past that there have been certain cases in which certain people actually bought the seat rather than having the popular support. So what is your opinion on that sort of elections?
You see, there's a valid point what you have made. Now, the valid point is that political parties would normally put up their own party candidates to be nominated to either the Legislative Council or the upper house in the Central Parliament. There's a problem which we have seen in some states, and that's the last seat phenomena. And this problem was visible in Karnataka, in Maharashtra, and on some occasions in even Uttar Pradesh, not in other states. That is when no party has the strength to win that last seat. And you need a combination of some political parties. And that's where money bags did enter. One of the reforms that I had done when I was the law minister that I had made the voting to the upper house in the Lok Sabha, in the Rajya Sabha, as a transparent voting, precisely because of this problem. Earlier you used to have cross-voting where party candidates lost, and you found that the industrialist won because he paid large amounts of money and no party would know where its MLAs had voted for. So one of the reforms I brought about in the Representation of People's Act was that every time an MLA votes for a Rajya Sabha election, he would require to show his vote to a party nominee. And then the courts held that if he voted against the party nominee, this will deemed to be relinquishment of the membership of the political party and make him liable for action under the anti-defection law. So that was well carried. And as I said that some people have a problem with every solution, so Mr. Kuldeep Nair challenged it in the Supreme Court, saying this is unconstitutional. And the choice was between transparency and corruption. So it went to a constitution bench of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided in our favor. And this method has been upheld. So today, the Rajya Sabha voting is a transparent voting. You have to show your vote. And if you vote against the decision of the party, you get out. But the problem still remains. So what does a party do when you have that last seat phenomena? I had, in the context of Karnataka, some years ago suggested to some friends that if you have this phenomena, rather than allow undeserving candidates to come in by this process, allow an eminent citizen. It could be some former chief of the armed forces or a former judge or some eminent author who's politically not aligned to come in so that such people can also have a voice in the upper house. It's better than having a money bag just enter. That suggestion was not accepted at that stage, but this problem remains. The second thing I must tell you, that the mistake I made at that time when I was amending this law was that I did it for Rajya Sabha. I did not bring a corresponding change, and that was a lapse for the MLC elections. And while it was being passed, the records of Parliament will be showing that Mr. Mulayam Singh Yadav got up and said, industrialists will get into Rajya Sabha, so you have stopped that by this process. But what about the liquor dealers who will get into the legislative councils? So please make a change for that also. And I think that change is long overdue. Now that that provision has been upheld, at some stage it should be done even for the MLCs.